And hello and welcome everybody. I'm Robert Adichie and I'm here with Darrell Hayhurst and John Watson. Yeah, guys.
Hey, how's it going,
And we
everybody?
are here to talk about the Tharkold Sourcebook. So we've kind of in our previous Q and A's we've gone through kind of the map and what has changed with that. We've done the major threats and sort of the common threats, and so now we're just sort of here to talk about kind of do a deep dive on the source book. Uh,
The deep dark
yeah.
crevices.
So let's look at the looking at the crowdfunding here. So if you can go to Game On Tabletop right now, and you can see that we have 589 backers, and we've raised
Yay.
128,000. So we're about 1,500 before unlocking the next level up. I'm gonna throw that in the chat real quick here. So and chat, feel free to ask questions as we're talking, and we'll try to get to those as quickly as we can.
Please, because otherwise I'm just gonna blabber, and you guys don't. No one wants that.
Yeah, I might fall asleep. No, I'm just joking.
Speaking of blabbering, Darrell, why don't you tell us about this source book, how it came to be, sort of like what we're doing here.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll start with the deep dark secrets because I
Yeah.
always like to, like that's the bonus for showing up to this content, everyone. So the two settings that when we were initially working on them, with Shane and Ross and everybody else, that I had the most input on were the cyber papacy and Tharkold. So they were kind of like my two babies. And I had to make a choice, scheduling wise, because we knew as we got rolling, we weren't going to, one person wasn't going to be able to go book to book to book to book to book. Like I can be involved in all of them, but I can't be the lead on all of them. And I had to make a very difficult choice early on whether I was going to take the lead on cyber papacy or Tharkold, because they were next to each other on the schedule. And it was tough because I think, deep in my heart, I like the cyber papacy better, but I also felt like the cyber papacy had enough other people that got it, that could carry that torch forward, that I could leave it more in their hands. Whereas Tharkold, it's a little bit of a different beast, and you can see that too, even in our own internal squad, moving, updating it and doing the new things for it. There's a strong tendency to view it through the same prism that original Tharkold was, and this one's a little bit different. Like we grabbed certain aspects to try and really push to the front, and just setting it in Russia, where the original tried to but failed, and then it went to Los Angeles instead. Just moving it back to Russia has such a major impact on all of the flavor and everything for it, that if you try and write it like the old one, it doesn't work. like you gotta pull back from that. So I have no regrets that I got to focus on this one. I'm super happy about that.
So what was that like? So did it start in Russia in the original one?
Yeah, in the original one, it's a one paragraph reference when they talk about there were other High Lord landings that were attempted. Like the big six that the book talked about were the ones that latched on and took hold, and they're like, oh, not all of them went that great. There was the Techno demons of Tharkold tried to land in Russia, but their bridge got blown up. And they originally weren't going to do much more with it. But that one paragraph was so evocative. People were like, what? Techno demons in Russia? What is that all about? So they ran with it. They were like, oh, yeah, this is something. We had a lightning strike and it hit something. So cool. Let's do something more.
And
with
so
it.
was there, so after that, then there was a separate book that kind of covered it? And that was for
it was
LA, right?
Yeah, there were two books. The main one was Tharkold, and then the second one was City Book Los Angeles, which were kind of the same thing, right? Because the notion in the original was Tharkold only took over a portion of Los Angeles, and then later on a portion of Berlin. There were two cities that the Techno Demons kind of came into, and they went. I mean, it was definitely techno horror, and still had that that Hellraiser, Terminator, vibe going for it, but it was mixed in much more strongly with like a Blade Runner vibe. And the stuff from the original that I think was pretty prophetic was they were talking about 3D printers like long before that was a gleam in the public eye. It's
Good point.
Right? Like that's how you make equipment in Tharkold. It's all STL files. They don't call them STL files, but it's all STL files.
Is that what UltraCAD was? I wanted mention that for. Okay.
That's
Yep.
That's exactly what an UltraCAD is. And it's like we take it for granted now. Like that's just a thing, but that was like heavy science fiction when it came out. I was like, man, that's tech level 25. Wow, we can't do that.
Nice. Let's see.
So 23 tops.
Prince Earwig asks, what was one thing that you kind of left in OTORG that maybe that really didn't fit with the new Tharkold?
We left the miracles.
Yes.
And what is that?
So in the original one, a lot of the power in Tharkold, they didn't really have, the Psionics wasn't as much a thing, and magic still had the drawbacks, but miracles were what the demons used. The notion was like, it's evil miracles, but it's spiritual power that they use. And we wanted to go the other way with that and say that no, demons, they're anti-spiritual. Like they're beings of magic. They don't believe in anything. So with that as a baseline, faith is probably the wrong direction to do their powers. They've still got these powers. Most of it's either magic. And also in the old system, you didn't have the perk framework. Like since everything was based on skills, if you had the skill, you could do the thing. So if we want the bad guys to be able to do a thing, well, there's got to be a skill and then anyone can do it. Whereas we're not, by design, we don't have that limitation in the new one. We can just say, and they do this.
Perk. There you go.
They don't. Yeah, the bad guys don't have to follow the same rules. Like they've got this option that you don't as a player character. We talked about this when we were talking about introducing the Tharkoldu, the demons, as potential player characters. Now we've got to draw a very particular line on, well, which of those abilities can you have as a player, in which are like, no, that comes from just being pure evil. You can't be that, And I think I gave credit in that episode. I was against Tharkoldu's characters. John's the guy. He made that happen.
Hell no, but that was probably the best thing, the thing I'm most proud of in this. You and I collaborating, and we were on both opposite ends completely. But what we came together and made, oh man, seriously, like I'm excited. I want to almost pay somebody to run games for me so I can just play an aspirant, So such a better concept.
Nice. So let's see. Forbin Projects asks, in OTORG, power creep was very noticeable in the Tharkold Sourcebook. How does the power level of threats and PC options measure up for Tharkold and Torg Eternity? And do you have any mechanisms in the design process for stopping power creep this time around?
Yeah, we've got a couple of mechanisms built in. One was no new skills, right? We're just never going to introduce a new skill. I mean, if we do, that's a mea culpa. That's all right. We screwed up. We missed something big, and we have to retro it. So then, our mechanisms for adding new options that players like are new spells and powers, new perks. And then the main concern is when we add a new spell or add a new perk, how does it balance with the existing framework? Like the best case scenario is we're finding a niche that hasn't been explored yet, so it's not comparable. You don't have to worry about it. The worst case scenario is it does something almost exactly the same as something that already exists, just better in every way. That's not good, right? And we'll occasionally drop the ball, right? We try hard, but some of them are misses and they get caught in playtesting is the large hope, and some of them the last safety net is when the file goes out at the end of the crowdfunding and people get to try it. And if people scream, I was like, well, let's take a look at that again. And sometimes you get that, and it's like, well, no, sorry, everyone, you're just wrong. It's not that great. Like, I know you think it is, but like this other option no one's taking is way better.
Yeah, it's amazing. When you really really know a system or really run it a lot, you just sort of get these ideas of, or like a better kind of view of what is kind of happening over the whole thing when you get to run it a lot, or when you're really into it. But when you just look at something and, if you haven't played it or haven't played it a lot, sometimes it can seem overbearing, even though it might not really be.
Yeah, and it's also, there's a play style element.
Sure, yeah.
Like there are, certain things that you can do to abuse certain powers or combinations that people are like, oh my God, it's broken. And I'm like, well, don't do it. Like, come on, what are you doing?
Yeah. There'll be a little bit of self-control there too. Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah. And because one of the other things that this is something that, I wanted to push early on, and it can change over time. Right. But what we didn't want to do, we didn't want to fall into the trap of in the rules saying very specifically what you can't do. Like, like you can only do this, because if when you do that, you get so trapped like in that box, and it takes some of the fun out. Like, we want some flexibility, we want some openness to that, and it's a risk when you start calling out, but you can't do this.
Yeah.
Like, well, here's this other thing that you didn't say I can't do, so I can obviously do that. And that's why, like, the phrase that you see repeated very often in the original rule book, Torg Eternity rule book, is GM's call. And we try not to abuse that, but we also acknowledge there's times, GM, you're just going to have to make the call and be like, no, that doesn't work. Or that works today, but on Tuesdays it just doesn't. That's, we're going to try and give you a crutch so you're not having to make those calls, but sometimes it's inevitable. And that's where some of the power creep stuff comes from, is where people are finding cheats or whatever, like ways to use things that were not at all what was intended. And then the question comes back to us: do we lock that down? Like, do we officially say, no, you can't do that? Which again opens up the whole door to, well, here's this other thing you didn't specifically say I can't do, therefore I can't. Or you approach it as, well, we didn't say you can do it, so you can't, but then you've slammed the door on all of these creative opportunities, which is sort of what Torg represents.
Definitely. So. Yeah, definitely something for GMs to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah.
So let's start with it. Let's kind of dig in, and I guess just kind of start from the beginning.
Well, the first thing in the book is the fiction, and everyone's used to, like, we're using the same exact sectional layout that we use on the other source books. We wanted them to be very consistent. We think we found something that works, that's providing value to people. So don't expect any big surprises there. And the fiction in this one actually came back from it was a message board comment that kind of got to me back in the day. Like it stuck in my craw, where and it was a completely valid point, right? Which is the poster's issue was, hey, this time the invasion in Russia worked, right? They landed, wasn't optimal, but it's something. And we've got this High Lord Cranod who didn't really get to do anything in the original. Like, he's mentioned by name, but by the time Tharkold comes back to Berlin and Los Angeles, he's out of the picture already, and it's Jezreel in charge. And we'd, in the beta player's guide or GM's guide, the one that kind of gives a flash forward to everyone, so they could see our very broad roadmap for year one, because it's taken us a while to get here. Like, these books take time to put out. And meanwhile, games have got to move on. Game Master can't just sit on his own. It's like, well, we'll wait a couple years and then I'll find out what they're doing with it. It's like, well, We want to give you the big picture. Go play. Go do your own thing. You've got all. We tried very hard to give you all the tools you need to do this. And here's roughly where we're going. And we mentioned in that Cronod's going to get killed, and there's going to be this civil war. And the poster was like, damn it. I mean, we just got Cronod. Like, we finally get to do something with him. And you're going to murder him right off the bat? Like, thanks for nothing, you know? And then the second part of that was, and how does that even work, right? He's this big, badass techno demon. You know, he's this very powerful figure. He's, you know, described as being awesome. And he just gets punked by, you know, his thrall, this little punky human. What's up with that? And like, when I read that, I'm like, but yeah. And I'm like, oh wait, I have a place to respond to this, right? Like, we got a book that's going to be telling you exactly how and why like that works. And we're always, when we do the fiction, I think it's the fiction generally is meant to set the tone, right? Like, hey, this is the kind of adventure that you're going to be here. And I diverged from that a little bit on the Tharkold one. And actually, this is one of the only ones that I wrote. But I was like, I want to tell that story of how Jezreel kills Cronod because it's important. Like, it does tell you not only something about Cronod and about Jezreel, but about Tharkold itself and how it works and how this is inevitable, right? Like, this is Tharkold in a nutshell. Like, this is how this goes. And I think it worked out pretty good, personally. People that have read it are like, oh, like, okay. Yeah. Like, I get it. Like, that makes sense now.
Yeah, it's a very cool story. Talk about, there's a little content warning there.
Yeah.
Talk about that. That's something that, you know, it's definitely top of people's mind these days. So tell us about the content warning.
So Tharkold's a challenging place, right? Like, everything about it is brutal. Like, it's the roughest cosm in every way, in terms of like, oh man, like, it gets rough here. And not just blood and gore, but if you get into like the psychology and some of the psychosexual stuff around it, this could be easily an R or X rated product. And we're a PG-13 game line. So we wanted to really like dance along that line. You know, like, this is the book that has to go to the ratings board a couple of times before we get our PG-13 cut. And if you're really looking, you can see where we're, you know, insinuating the darker stuff. And that's something that every GM is going to have that same challenge with, right? Like, they've got different Torg groups. And it's like, how do you remain true to what this brutal, nasty place is, but also not necessarily go there at your table because you're playing with your kids or whatever. Yeah. Like, how do you do that? So we wanted to tell you, like, all right, this is right on the edge of that safe place, everyone. Like, we're going to be looking into that abyss. We're not going to step into it. You're invited to step into it, and here's some tools if you do. But we're going to go right up to that edge and like look over and like peek over and be like, okay, that's as far as we can go here.
Yeah, it kind of gives, like you said, it kind of gives suggestions for using some safety tools like the X card, script changes, lines and veils. So it's definitely mentioned there, which is great. And, you know, like Prince Erig says, it's a table conversation that needs to be had probably at every table. Yeah, for if you're playing in Tharkold. Just
yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, no. I was just, you know, agreeing with that. That's all. So, but yeah, I think you did a phenomenal job on the story there, Darrell. And it's kind of funny how, you know, the next section, well, I guess after that it ties into, but the aspirants and all that, you know, ties in there when, you know, it's not necessarily said or something, but, you know, Cronod views Jezreel as, you know, when you read the fiction in a certain way, more so than just, you know, she's just my slave, my property, if you will. You know, a little bit more than that, which might be part of his undoing. Maybe he became an aspirant. Who knows? You know, which is, I like how that kind of worked out too in that.
Nice.
Yeah, and let's not pretend he's a good guy, but like,
no.
there's there's like that glimmer of guilt that like, okay, like, and like these are heavy topics, right? You know, when we talk, we use the word thrall instead of slave, but like this is a slave society, and we like that's revolting to us, right? Like we can't even have that conversation openly in a lot of ways without really hurting people. And that's why it's like, well, and yet that's part and parcel of what this world is. So we've got to find a way to engage with that in a as safe a way as possible, but also not pretend that it's okay. You know, it's like that even a demon can be like, man, that's really bad. Like, this is rough.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Oh no, man.
Nice. Let's see. Just kind of looking back here. Someone says, Grey March asks, will we be seeing Starrett of Blades at some point?
Ooh, you know, I actually almost decided to try to, write him in, but if I had to guess, at some point, yes, we will. The Starrett, as I recall, was Jezreel's lieutenant from the old edition. I actually really liked him. But if I had to guess, yeah, at some point in this, he doesn't make an appearance yet, but that's the thing that's wonderful about, RPGs and, having different people on teams and such is that, yeah, you never know. As of right now, though, no, Starrett is not thing, but, he might peek his head out if I have anything to say about it sometime at some point.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why, and John's sort of seen how I do this, right? Because one of my constant watchwords when I was the guy, Greg's the guy now, right? I just work for Greg, but Greg's got the same feeling, right? It's like Torg is bigger than one viewpoint. And so like for me, it was like Cronod and Jezreel and the Wolf were the ones that caught my attention. So it's like, all right, you're one, since I'm calling the shots, like that's where our focus is, But we also know that, and Thrachin too. Like Thrachin was kind of a late addition to that. We're like, oh, that we almost forgot. Like, let's get Thrachin in there, right? And so you got like that whole thing swirling around there, and it's like that's enough characters. Like that's enough meat and drama. But we also know, like, we want to move the story forward, and by the end of the year, we don't have Cronod. 2 of the 3, between Jezreel, the Wolf, and Thrachin are either going to be dead or not major players in Tharkold by the end of it. So that you want to leave some space for the new voices to rise. So if something did happen to Jezreel, it's where the blade could come to the fore, and you've got something to do in the next year. So
makes sense.
We try not to hold back. We want to kind of fire our shots and empty that magazine as quick as we can, and not like, oh, we're going to save this. You're not going to deal with Cronod for another couple of years. Like, no. Right off the bat, he's gone. Next, Civil War, let's do it. Who wins? Next, who's...
Nice. Nice. All right, well, let's go on to the next section here. Kind of talks about life in Tharkold, sort of like what that looks like.
Yeah, and so we got, and this is like our classic opening section that's going to tell you, like, here's how the war is going, and we know from our previous discussions and previews and all that it's developed into this civil war after the death of Cronod. You've got the 3 major factions duking it out, and life is very different in each of the 3 sections. And one of our cool resources that we got to add for this book, and I apologize if I say his name wrong. I've only ever read it. I think it's Lehman or Lemon.
Lehman, yeah.
But he's Lehman, yeah. He's actually spent a lot of time in Russia, so he's got that
very helpful.
That feet on the ground, that view that we really like. That we want to get it right. And like it's pretty funny. Like the stuff that I wrote, right, just from my own sort of cynical view of it, and he's like, nope, that's pretty close.
I just more liked when at one point I was going to name one major NPC something in Russian. He said, John, you might want to think sure this translates to blah, blah, blah. And he had me change like, oh, that would have been bad. Yeah, thank you. So just having that expertise there, I'm not going to say what it was exactly, but it was very helpful.
And I'll call out one of the other ones that he mentioned, which was Katrina Tovarich, which we all knew is kind of like, all right, yeah, that's not a real name, but it's a real name in Old Torg, right? So it's like, we thought like, do we update her? No, like she's still got to be Katrina Tovarich, and she's just got a weird name, and that's just how it is, right? Like, and then, but the fun thing is like that opens up storytelling possibilities. It's like, well, we lampshaded. Why is she named that? Did she choose that name? Is it, like what's going on with that? Or so, but yeah, like there's stuff like that where it's like, well, that doesn't quite work, the way that the way naming convention should, but that is her name. And you get that like all the time in real life, right? Like Moon Unit Zappa. That's not a real name. Yeah, it turns out it is. Right? Because
it is if somebody wants it to be, yeah.
Right. So like that's how you roll. But yeah, we go through the different areas and how the war is going in them. And one of the things that we try to do, starting with the Living Land and moving on, was make these very different zones inside every realm, so that when you travel from place to place, the feeling changes depending on where you are. And with Tharkold, we tied that to the factions of the Civil War, right? Like, because our Tharkold's always been this almost uncomfortable fusion of these different elements, right? We've got the kind of the Techno Demon magic Hellraiser. You've got the Terminator style technology. And then you've got what we like to call our Eastern Promises, right? Like that very Russian kind of tragic noir, almost political thriller aspect. And then you got Mad Max too, right? Like there are all these, and it's like those don't necessarily always fit perfectly well. Like you don't look at that and go, oh yeah, I totally get what to do with that. And the nice thing about the Civil War is it lets us microcosm each of those and then play with how they come together at the seams and interact with one another, which is a very Torg thing, right? Like that's what the game overall does. It's like we got all these cosms and then they meet and then explosions happen. We're all about the explosions.
Nice. Let's see. Somebody had asked, let's see. I guess this is, we'll get into this later. It's more about psionics, but we'll get into it when we get to that section. So, so is there, kind of looking at this, like one of the sections is like Core Earth's response, and what do you think if there's like a the overarching kind of meta plot of the Gaunt Man kind of doing his thing with everybody, sort of what is something that you can kind of spoil or make sure that people know about this book? Like how does that move that forward?
Yeah, so and Greg would talk about like his favorite interplay is the back and forth between the High Lords and their tactics and Core Earth adapting and evolving to face them, and then the counter adaptation and evolution that the High Lords have to kind of come back at them. And that's why, like in the original core book, we've got here's what Stella, look like and how they behave. And it's like, wow, what do you know? You can rip Stella, right? Like we've got the tools to do this. And so the High Lords don't like their Stella being ripped up. So in every book, it's like, well, here are the defenses that they've added to their Stella to make them, like more difficult to pin down. And the fun part is the Tharkold Stella are mecha. Like there are these like demonic, Shoggoth things that you're like, all right, let's go rip the Stella, and like the tentacles come out and the blasters start shooting. You're like, oh damn it, oh, this is the worst thing ever. Like it's supposed to be a reality contest, not a combat. What are we doing? And like in the curses and all that. And so you and Tharkold itself has this very unusual condition among all of the other invasions, where they come to detente very early, right? They get to a point where open fighting stops, and they are at least nominally cooperating with one another to try and maintain some stability, because if they just keep fighting, the whole place crumbles. Like, both sides are like, we just got to stop. Clearly that ends because of the Civil War. The fighting starts again. But so you got a couple different periods of the response. You got the early response, where you got the Delphi Council trying to pressure Russia, saying, hey, like, you're almost there, right? Like, you got this détente. If you can keep pushing, we can get rid of these guys. But meanwhile, you got the Wolf, who's like, these guys are power. Like, I am more powerful in Tharkold than I am on core Earth. I don't necessarily want to win. Like, I don't want to make them go away. I want their power. And maybe I want that power to save the rest of Earth. Like, we don't know that motivation. Spoiler alert, no, he just wants his own power. But but that's the story that he'll tell. It's like, this is what I'm doing for Earth. You know, like, I'm going to lean into this power. I'm going to use it. Use the weapons of your enemy. You're a fool to leave that weapon lying on the ground. He's no fool. And then in the second phase of that, where where Cronod goes down and, everyone can fight again, you get the really, outrageous move where the Wolf himself starts taking over Europe, like planting Stella and increasing Tharkold's borders in pursuit of that goal. And obviously people aren't great with that. Like, there's a response there. Like, but you get that whole question of like, well, can we fight ourselves on this? Like, what does it mean if we go to war with Russia? Not with Tharkold, with Russia. Like, how does that work? And the political fallout of all that can be very interesting. And that lets us have our shooting war, but also gives us that wiggle room for that political style campaign, where it's like, well, we're still technically cooperating. Like, it's not, neither side trusts the other one. Neither side is happy to have to depend on the other one, but we are still on paper pursuing the same goal of winning this war. How does that work out?
Nice. So let's move on a little bit into character options. So John, you seem to have been really excited about the aspirants. So kind of how did those come about?
Well, they almost didn't. At first, I approached Darrell, and I think my opening thing, we were kind of, I got brought on board and everything was, hey, well, in the old Tharkold, I liked it that you could play, a Techno demon. I thought that was awesome. He's like, John, come on. I could almost feel it coming through the email, because the email, like, are you kidding me? This massive eye roll. They're evil. They're incarnation of all this bad stuff. And I kind of sat there, was like, man, he's kind of got a point. And then I gave it some thought, and what we came up with was basically, at first we we're gonna go more of just a pure redemption path, but that didn't quite fit either. It was more of they're just not pure evil anymore. So they're made creatures from evil magic. One of the differences from old Tharkold, where it goes into the demons, are actually they're a species that's born. All of
they're
that.
Just dudes. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they're just a different species that happen to be called demons because they look like it.
And thank God we didn't go that route, right? Because Dungeons and Dragons and orcs and all that. It's like all of that language that comes into that, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't want to make them just a biological species. It's like, well, no, they're not that. They're literally evil. Like, everything that you hate, that's what they are. When in chart, like, this is the personification of slavery and bigotry and all that. How do you make that a good guy? Was my counterpoint. But John's reply was free will. Once free will comes into it, how do we make room for free will? And I'm like, that's an interesting story. Since it's an interesting story, now we got to engage with it.
So, yeah, thankfully I had a decent argument because that was something I was very passionate about. But like I said, the product that Darrell and I came up with, the aspirants as a result, is just a really interesting story. Because like I said, not what I like about them is, well, yeah, they're playable, but you're not necessarily good, is how I would describe them. You're just better. I mean,
Right.
something that was this horrible thing, as Gerald just described, the worst nightmares of humanity manifested in something physical, a physical being, and you're not that anymore. But that's hard to completely walk away from. So it's going to be a constant struggle for those characters, and they're very rare. I should point out too, it's not very common because when you can imagine their brethren see something like this, they're going to root out that weakness, that cancer, if you will. Just really, I'm excited to hear the players, their stories and experiences with the aspirants, and they're of course weaker. We didn't think it was wise to let somebody run around playing a full-fledged techno demon, because they're very powerful, as you can see in the core book. So they're definitely weaker, but there's ways through perks and things of that nature to restore some of that power, if you will.
Mostly by being more evil.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of got to go back there a little bit, but I think we still captured that just right. From everything, through that process. It was, if I had to pick one thing from working on this project I'm most proud of, it's that. Right there, that final result. And that was definitely a group effort between Darrell and I, and some others, had their influence as well, but mainly.
Yeah, but you pushed that one, man. That's all you.
I appreciate that, brother. But yeah, but it wouldn't have been what I wanted to be originally. It would have been that, which wouldn't have been as good. This is much fine. So take your credit too, sir.
Well, right, but that's why it's important to have multiple voices on these books, right? Like everyone's got their this is what I think it should be, right? Like I think Jezreel should be redeemed, but then when you got multiple points of view, you start finding out oh no, that's just not going to happen, right? Like that doesn't work. So also talking about races, species, we've got the race, in there, and there was some debate. In the original, in Torg Eternity core book, we didn't make them a separate species. We're like, they're human, whatever. We talk about them enough as a separate thing that we're like, all right, we're going to make a separate, race entry for them. It's literally identical to human in almost every way. The one thing that gets is they have a greater capacity. They don't have limits for psychic powers, essentially. That's it. And it's very subtle. It's not a power move. It's one of those stat wise you're human. You've just got the ability. Whereas a Tech 23 human can only take one psychic skill, the race could take any, and that's it.
Cool.
That's their big.
Speaking of Tech 23, then, so Simon English had asked, will Psionics of Core Earth give us a minor telekinesis power for Social Axiom 23 so that we can preserve the flavor of our Core Earth and Pan Pacific TKs who've been played prior to the various errata?
Yes.
Yes.
I disagree with the errata personally.
All right.
Then that's one of those. It was a power balance issue that enough people were having a problem with that we felt like, okay, we have to address this. In my game, I'd run it the old way, so I don't think it's an issue personally. For that, and it's the same GM call thing, right? You can do this. What? No, you can't do that. Why would you think you can do that? You can throw a pencil around, dude. Freaking do that. That's what it's for.
Nice.
So. All right, anything that Firestarter did, if you've seen it in a Stephen King novel, Tech 23 should do it. And that is what we'll lean into when we eventually do more, Core Earth items coming up in year 2.
Nice.
Those of you that got kind of left out in the cold in the meantime, sorry. Tell your GM, Darrell said it's okay, just use your TK.
So let's see. Looking at the race, are they, they're the thralls, and then you have the free. So are there some of the free, excuse me, that are not necessarily like allies, kind of, because it seems like the free would sort of be, as default, helpful to Storm Knights. But are there any that are maybe not so helpful?
Well, that's the bright side of being free.
You can do what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so in general, you've got, you're talking about a species that has been dominated and enslaved for hundreds of years. And there are very, very, very few pockets of survivors that have not been crushed under that heel for all that time. And so we got to mention them because they do have a very different mindset from those that have been slaves for so long. And in some ways, these guys, this other group, they're carrying the torch, right? Like they're the ones that can remember what it's like to not, be crushed by someone else. But they're also rare. They're also hunted. They're like practically feral, right? Like they're a very rare commodity. And we don't put a lot into conflicts among the race because, and we had the same thing with the dwarves, right? Where people are like, oh, cool, we should have like this group of dwarves that disagrees with that group. And I'm like, there's like 10,000 of these guys left. They can't afford to fight. I mean, now reality would tell us they would anyway, like even though you can't afford to, but as a role-playing game, we would put more emphasis on that than it would carry in reality. So we don't put any emphasis on it all. It's like, yes, there are absolutely guys that disagree and are going to do their own thing. If we put a portion of the book into talking about them, well, that's a thing in everyone's game now. Like that's now 5% of this entire species is fighting itself. It's like, well, no, like it's not that common, so we're not going to go that deep into it.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's see. Looking at the perks, what's one of your favorite perks in here?
I like the whole depravity subset. Like that's my jam. I was like, let's make perks around being depraved and just like embracing the horribleness of Tharkold. It's like, yep, you live here, you work here.
Well, tell us about that. Did we?
Sadism.
I don't think that was. I think we just mentioned it before in the perks section or the perks preview. What is that? Like, what does that look like if characters are depraved and gets a depraved perk?
Yeah, so like the depravity is like we looped in like all of the perks that are like kind of fall under the law of pain and things like that. So like masochist is a big advantage there.
Yeah, nice.
Makes me laugh even talking about it. Like, yeah,
totally. How about you, John?
Like, hurt.
For me, man, depravity is actually one of my favorites as well. But I also really liked going through the Psionics perks, making the different ones there, because we'd seen a lot of spell things and of that nature in Isle, and even in the Nile Empire as well, having on magic. And this was the first time we really got to heavily explore that and just flavoring for Tharkold, and tried to take an approach even with kind of the Cold War aspects in there as well. Some of it and. I really liked that, the psionics perks and, seeing what they can do and introducing even, new, I guess, branches of powers is what you would call them, in there as well, both for the race and just regular humans as well.
Right. And that was one of the fun, like, convergences, right? We've got the psychic power, like a part and parcel of Cold War mythology is, the Psychic Institute, and the almost sort of arms race like that happened, not in any real way, but real enough that it exists in our world, right? So it's like in a weirder world like Core Earth, that was absolutely a thing, right? So like we got to lean into that. It's like, oh, this totally fits here. This is like form built for it.
Yep.
So we have a pretty hard stop time here in about 10 minutes. So if you guys have your questions, go ahead and get them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we move on through. So let's see. The next section is magic. So how has magic changed, or what's magic? What's going on with magic in Tharkold?
Well, in Tharkold, in my opinion, magic, I wanted to first start with, and talk with Darrell and everything, the demons, what do demons embody? They embody, ferocity, dominance, a lot of, negative emotions, let's call them what they are. And then you got Tharkold as well. You do have, some technology. You want to represent kind of the Mad Max themes of things as well. So I wanted to mix all that together. So, a lot of the magic involves things like that. And these are, spells that are weaker, compared to Isle, because as we know in the history, Tharkold no either has that power of attack Oxium to support some of those, but still some of the spells are a little bit different, I'll say, without giving too much away. But they mainly focus on those kind of things. If you want to dominate your foes in a way to maybe give yourself some kind of better intimidation or things of that nature. They're also very twisted spells, where there might be some negative to gain a positive, but they therefore are a little bit stronger because of that. So, the general flavor was like that too. And I also wanted to, put it in a way to where it could blend even the occult tech as well, where they're a blend of magic and technology. A lot of the spells capitalize on that and make that even more so as well. What are your thoughts, Darrell?
No, just what you said. So in the core book, the approach was we want to get the bread and butter spells that are going to apply everywhere. And then we want to save the more specific ones, not necessarily we'll do more powerful spells later. It's more like, well, no, these are spells that just fit better in one place rather than all of them. And yeah, the Tharkold spells was like, well, this is a magic that is developed in a high-tech society. So it's all or not all of it, but a lot of it is, how do I magically manipulate these items, or technology, or boost that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something an Isle spell will never do, right?
Yeah.
I do fireball. I don't do, enhanced,
Mm-hmm.
engine, but enhancing an engine, something a Tharkold would be like, yes, please. That's magic I can use,
Yeah, and that's another thing, Darrell pointed out is, the magic's more of not that the race can't wield it, but that's more of the demons domain, the techno demons domain, whereas the psychic powers would be more of the race's domain.
Right, yeah, because magic is how the race got in trouble in the first place.
Yep, exactly.
Now, you do have casters, but generally if you cast, you bring a demon, and that means there are probably not a lot of those guys left.
Let's see. Forbin Project asks, what would you say is the new element in the book that adds the greatest new dimension or conflict front to the overall arc of the Possibility Wars?
So the easy answer is the Civil War, right?
Yeah.
Because you have three potential sides that you can pick, or none, right? You can fight all three if you want, right? But in general, by the end of it, you're going to have to pick a side. And that's the moral dilemma of it, is which evil is actually lesser here. I don't think anyone can make the case that Thrachin is the lesser evil. So.
Oh my, yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm there with you.
Right, so it's okay, but Jezreel, she's a junkyard dog. I mean, she's been beaten and is now that creature that will just go for the throat every time. Can you work with her? And then you got Volkov, who's like, well, I mean, we can work with him. He's pretty chill, but oh man, he's potentially way more dangerous than Jezreel in so many ways. What do we do here? That's the most interesting, way it opens up to me. But I don't know that that's the only answer. There's quite a, we also open up the whole the Techno hell.
Oh yeah. That one's all you, buddy. You get 100% credit for that one. That's genius. When I read it, it was just like, oh man, that's brilliant. Yeah.
And I mean, that's not even me, right? That's synthesis of all the stuff that you see out there, right? You watch Hellbound and you've got this notion of what hell looks like. And then you've also got the literature from the original that talks about the grid. And, so it's okay, if demons are building their own hell, what does it even look like?
Yep.
and they're building it with technology, which means it's the internet, you know. And you talk
Facebook.
about people that exactly right. People can't stand Facebook now. How are you going to be like, well, now you're trapped in it forever? Ha! You know, like,
Yeah, you
what
just
hell
gave
is
it all
like.
away, Darrell. That was that whole act I wrote. No.
Nice.
It all comes back around, right? But like, and that to me, like, that's the fun part of Torg is when, like, we do these as kind of crazy game things, but they actually can say something about the real world. Like, I think that's the joy of the cyber papacy. It's all the things that you look around and you go, yeah, we're there, right? Like, that's a real thing. Like, as much as it's a game thing, they're like, I can see it in reality too. And like, that's where we like step on the precipice of art is being able to then engage with things in the real world in that way, you know. And Tharkold's a rough place, so it's probably good that it's coming out in kind of a rough time.
Yeah.
So,
And why we're very challenged with Pan Pacifica, because that was all about a plague, and now we're like,
Yeah.
like too real. Uh-oh.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit too much. Yeah.
So the next section is on psionics. So since psionics seem to kind of play such a kind of big part with the race, what has sort of changed, or what's new and cool in psionics?
Well, in psionics, I mean, you could explore a lot. I mean, the peak of psionic potential and abilities. You know, the race, you know, has been masters of psychic powers for, you know, quite a while now. And, you know, some of the things they've been able to do are, well, they're crazy. I mean, you're reading through some of these powers, they're going to be really just like, whoa, it can actually do that. Trust me, we had some debate about this. A lot of them, the powers, we design them and everything, we have looked through, but, you know, of course, when it comes out open to feedback. But, you know,
They're
being able
also, but they also are contradictory everywhere but Tharkold, and Tharkold's
yes.
So, like, and that's the thing with power creep is like, yeah, an Isle Mage in Isle is freaking badass, but when they're throwing Axiom 22 spells somewhere else, they're just going to blow up. It's inevitable. Same with the psychics.
And that's a good point Darrell made there too. So, you know, you definitely have that built-in balance aspect as well. But not to say they're like just all these are going to be like, what were you guys thinking, you know, going through here? There's a lot of thought. And then also, you know, the race, you've got their powers, which are going to be, you know, more of your, I mean, the race are a very war-focused people. That's how they've been raised. You know, all they've known is war, even the free, you know, the ones that are, you know, Darrell was saying they're almost feral. They're this warlike society. So, you know, a lot of their psychic abilities, not all of them, are going to be mainly focused around those kind of things. And then also something Darrell touched on earlier too is you've got the Psychic Research Institute. So of course we wanted to develop powers for that. And, you know, since, you know, Tharkold, parts of it, you know, of course, the Cosm are most of it's Tharkold, but you do have pockets of core Earth. I mean, the Russian president is a core Earther. That's one of the ones contending for power right now. So I thought it was important to, you know, include things at that Axiom level as well. You know, and you might see more information about playing if you want to play somebody that was maybe a former, you know, psychic research agent.
Right. You talk about core Earth abilities, those of you that want them, like we tried to cover that here. This is where we wanted most of our psychic stuff to be. And like one of my only pieces of advice for John when he was going in is like, watch the movie Push.
Nice. I remember just watching. Oh man, this is great. You know, just taking all these notes. I'd never actually seen it before. It was actually, I was surprised. Really good movie.
Most people haven't, but I think it's one of the best. Like I think that and Scanners are my two. That's psychic power.
Totally. All right, guys. Well, we are about done. Thanks everybody for asking questions. There's still a few questions that weren't answered, so. Why don't maybe you can jump over to our Discord and you could ask the questions there and we'll see if we can answer them there. We still have, you know, a week to go for the Tharkold crowdfunding on Game On. And we just passed where do we go? We've now got the Tharkold Psionics cards that are unlocked. The next one is the Delphi Missions Writers Roundtable. So that will come up, you know, sometime next weekend or next week. And we've got...
I think my good friend Tracy Sizemore will be one of those.
We've got the Tharkold spell cards at 140 and an actual play of some Delphi missions at 150,000. So we're getting there. Somebody had asked if there are more... Let's see, what did they ask? Any PDFs to unlock over 150,000. I don't have the the future's. Darrell's saying no. Okay.
I mean, like, if we get desperate, we'll figure something out. But we were planning, like, so we understand our market, and we're our best case scenario and our worst case scenario for people to come up, and we're pretty much landing right exactly where we thought we would be. So we want to make sure that the stuff that we know you want gets unlocked, and then at the higher end where we're not sure we're going to get it, that's where we're going to put weird stuff. And we'll figure it out if we get there. But we're kind of right on where we thought we'd be.
Nice.
So it's perfect. Thank you everyone for staying with us.
Definitely.
Yes, thank you so much.
With that, I'm Robert Adichie, and I'm here with John Watson and Darrell Hayhurst. Thank you guys for joining me in this deep dive of Tharkold. I learned a lot, and I hope everybody else did. So with that, we will see you. We'll see you around when we do the next. What's the next Q&A? I guess it's probably that. No, not the Delphi missions. Let's see what's back here. Oh no, there's a live play for Blood on the Blasted Lands. We'll get to that, and then the next probably Q&A will be that Delphi missions writers roundtable. So watch for that next week. All right, have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys.